This is based on an actual story that Charles Dickens wrote. He titled it The Life of Our Lord, and the subtitle is written for his children during the years 1846 to 1849.
I think it's great that it's star-studded cast.
Oh, yeah.
You may not know that going in unless you just recognize the voices, but I was really impressed with people behind the characters.
It gives a lot of more validity, you could say, culturally speaking, to Angel Studios, that you get this star-studded lineup of actors.
The goal of this movie is clearly to kind of give kids their first lesson in who Jesus Christ was.
I think it was hands down accurate. It was the gospel.
Hello, and welcome to the Pop Culture Contrarian with Thomas, Sterling, and Andrew.
Hello.
Hey, guys.
Our topic today is going to be King of Kings, the new animated feature movie from Angel Studios. It's hitting theaters. It's making a pretty good splash. Before we get started, make sure to check out patriotpostshop.com where you can find these awesome hats. And then we have some, since it's Easter week when you'll be seeing this, In God We Trust American flag sticker and God and Country with, again, the American flag. Check those out, patriotpostshop.com. We're brought to you by the Patriot Post, which is the oldest conservative news digest on the web. It's right and it's free. Be sure to like and subscribe. All right, so guys, King of Kings. We all went to go see this, yes?
Yes.
Indeed.
All right. Let's just, so the story is framed as Charles Dickens telling the story of the life of Christ, the greatest story ever told, to his young children. That's the framing for this story.
Right.
So let's start at the beginning because there was a little bit of weirdness that we were just discussing. So the movie opens, and I actually thought it was a commercial for a different Angel Studios movie because it opens with Scrooge,
Mr. Scrooge,
clutching at his grave and telling the spirit of the ghost of Christmas future, I've changed, take me back. That's where it opens.
Yeah.
So riff on that, guys. What did y'all think about that?
Well, it felt a little out of place just because it's like, it's not Christmas time, it's Easter, and it feels like it's the opening of a Christmas movie.
Right.
Especially it's Dickens, you know.
And that is what he's most famous for.
Victorian England, and it felt kind of Christmassy in the beginning. I know it really wasn't, but just sort of had the feeling of that kind of movie.
Yeah, I felt like I was thinking that kind of the same thing. This could have been released around Christmas time as well. I understand why they released it now, a week before Easter.
And I think it's more appropriate at Easter, but...
Right. But they did actually spend quite a bit of time once they got into the story and everything like that, and he's telling the story of Jesus. They did spend a good bit of time on the on the birth story of Christ.
Yeah, on the nativity story.
So in that sense, you could almost make the argument that it could just as well been a Christmas movie.
Almost, except the whole climax of the story is Passion Week and the crucifixion and resurrection. So
it's true.
That's why it's more appropriate for Easter. But so we just opened up and we told everybody that this movie starts with Charles Dickens. Why on earth would you do that?
I know.
Yeah.
I know.
I was pretty confused about that. My initial research showed no connection between Charles Dickens and like this story. So I was like, did they just make up the idea, hey, it'd be fun if we frame this as Charles Dickens telling his son about Jesus?
Yeah, let's do a Thomas Kincaid as well. Let's throw all the nice things in there.
Right, yeah. As it turns out, no, they didn't just make this up.
No.
This is based on an actual story that Charles Dickens wrote. He titled it The Life of Our Lord, and the subtitle is written for his children during the years 1846 to 1849. Yeah.
I think they could have done a better job of making that explicitly known at the beginning of the film. Maybe just a little text excerpt, just
exactly what I just said.
You read.
Yeah.
I mean, that would have totally set the stage and there wouldn't have been zero confusion.
Yeah. But as it was, it could have been more clear for sure.
I mean, yeah, there's the assumption that maybe we all knew that Charles Dickens did this, like we do know that he did with A Christmas Carol. But to be fair, this is very much a children's movie.
Yeah.
And from that standpoint, a child is not going to be familiar anyway with who Charles Dickens was.
That's a good point.
And so just having Charles Dickens' character telling the story to his son primarily about Jesus is something that I think for a child, they're going to be like, oh, so it's a dad. They probably wouldn't know who Charles Dickens is, so it doesn't matter. And he is telling his really curious son about the King of Kings.
Yeah.
And so from that point, I think they were just making this kind of, because at the very end of the film, which I think you unfortunately missed, they actually show, there was a scene in the very beginning where all his papers backstage are thrown around because the cat and everything.
Yeah. This is manuscript for the King of Kings.
Right.
Yeah.
And so he's reaching down and the cat's sitting on one and refuses to get off a piece of paper, and he in a fit rips it out from under the cat, and the fat cat's so fat that it rips the paper in half. Well, at the end of the movie, you see both pieces put back together.
Yeah.
And it's the title of his book.
The Life of Our Lord. Yeah.
So at that point, I'm thinking, okay, this was a real story that he wrote.
Well, I assumed that, but when I first searched it, I couldn't find any evidence. And then later I did find the book on Kindle. I bought it. It was 99 cents. So you can pick it up too. It's real cheap.
Yeah.
How many pages was this thing?
On Kindle, it's 662 pages, but that's
Really?
not real. That's not real pages. That's Kindle pages.
Okay,
Kindle.
so what would you guesstimate though? Like 200 real pages?
just take a look here. So like this is what the pages look like with pictures. It's a kid's book.
Yeah, that's at least 200 pages though.
I don't think so. I skimmed through most of it.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
600 of those?
Kids had a better
Kindle says 17
attention
minutes
span.
left in the book. So that's how long it thinks you would take you to read this.
Really? Okay, I guess. Okay.
No, sorry. I shouldn't have said the 600 number. That's Kindle. That's just a weird thing about the way
Okay.
that Kindle produces books.
I guess it is image heavy too.
Yes, it's image
Okay.
heavy.
On the point about, kids won't know about this stuff, that's fine.
Mhm.
But I would argue that a kid's movie, and being a dad, this is especially true, they need to be written for adults too.
Yeah.
Because parents are taking kids. And a good children's film does cater to both in appropriate ways.
Okay.
On that note, I don't know about y'all, but my theater, it was 3:15, so a matinee on a Friday, after school lets out, I suppose, but it was full of kids. I was
That's
very
great.
pleased.
Yeah. It was about 1:30 when I went, and there was a decent crowd. It wasn't empty by any means. It wasn't packed. And there were some kids there too, much younger because of school, I think.
Yeah, I was in a theater with, I think, 4 people,
Okay.
and one of them was a child.
There you go. There you
All
go.
right. Yeah.
So,
Well, yeah, the goal of this movie is clearly to kind of give kids their first lesson in who Jesus Christ was. And I think let's dig in on that. How does this do in its depiction of Jesus Christ, who we all believe to be the savior of mankind, and his life as the most central point in human history?
I think it was hands down accurate. It was the gospel.
yeah, I think it handled it fine. I think you got, just like they hit on, basically, I think primarily they hit on the synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke. In the main stories of Jesus, they highlighted several of his miracles.
Yeah.
It was a progressive revelation of who he was, you could argue, in his coming, in his birth, and then there was a little bit of his childhood. There's the bit where he's at the
Teaching in
temple. At the temple, and then his choosing of the disciples. They have that. They have his baptism. They have his temptation.
Yes. So let's dig in on that,
Yeah.
because I thought it was interesting. So the temptation of Jesus occurs after his 40 days in the wilderness of fasting. And Satan, I think, is the term used in the scriptures. I'm not sure if it's Satan or the devil. But
You mean, when in tempting him?
yeah, comes to tempt him. And different people have presented that different ways, usually as two figures speaking and talking, Jesus and the devil. In this, it's Jesus, and then it's a whirlwind and just a voice kind of from the ether speaking to him, which I thought that was interesting. I thought that was an interesting choice. Maybe it's because an image of the devil might be too scary for kids or something.
Yeah, I would think so.
I think it's wise too, because they did reference the serpent, and they depict an image of the serpent, although it's in a book.
Yeah.
But yeah, all we know from the record of scripture is that Satan came and tempted him by bringing him to different places.
Yeah.
And I thought that was really creative the way they did it.
Yeah. And they really, it's Angel Studios who they are Christians. I think most of the guild is Christian as well. So you would expect them to do this right.
Yeah.
But it's always refreshing when you see it done right. And that is something I was struck by the whole time, is Jesus is recognizably the savior that's depicted in the Bible and in the Christian faith. He's not some other character. He is he is Jesus Christ in this movie.
Yeah, they don't try to get into non-biblical kind of areas or speculation at all. It's like we have the record of who he was. They picked, because there was a lot of what Jesus is recorded doing in the Gospels. Obviously, they can't depict all of that in this movie. So they tried to hit on the key episodes and miracles that kind of unpack who Jesus is, so that and you kind of have it interwoven with the child kind of there effectively witnessing it all.
Yeah.
So I thought that was interesting how they did that. So he's in the story. He's not influencing any of the story, but he's in there and he's seeing it kind of.
There's a couple moments where he's kind of a character almost, where when the disciples are coming around looking for the fish and the bread to hand out for the feeding of the 5,000.
Yeah.
The kid is the one who offers up his jar of cookies, and that's what turns into the fish and the bread once the disciples.
Yeah.
And that is, again, to make everyone clear, that's Dickens' son, Charles Dickens' son.
Right.
Just to frame that out.
Right.
This is all taking place in Dickens' study.
When he's telling story, you see the Dickens character, and suddenly the Dickens character is the face of one of the characters he's talking about. And so that is interplayed throughout this whole thing. It's the
bringing to life of the story.
And it's kind of a tribute to Dickens as a storyteller.
It is.
This idea that he was most of the Western world knows who Charles Dickens is. Yeah. Primarily because of the one they started with, Christmas Carol. I did think there was a few things that were a little annoying.
Yeah.
I thought they made Charles Dickens a little bit too kind of like mad scientist-y,
Yeah.
And his wife was the like responsible one. And sometimes that just grates me. It's like, she's the one that's kind of like running the show and kind of like, basically, you're all children. You're just the older child. And so you need to,
even though she had zero control over the children.
So in the opening sequence, since we didn't touch on that, Charles Dickens is doing a dramatic retelling of A Christmas Carol. That's why they open there. And then his son, who he's telling the story to, is kind of going crazy playing backstage and ends up swinging into the main stage, and the cat runs around and
in front of a whole audience of paying patrons.
Yeah, and it completely ruins the performance, at least for a few minutes, until Dickens can get it under control. And mom's backstage just not controlling her children
at all.
And it was a little bit bothersome.
It was when we get to our meter, that was the one thing I knocked on the woke meter, because I felt like that was a little bit too like.
Oh, okay. That's interesting.
That it was kind of one of those things like.
It was an old trope.
It's an old trope, but it's the point you made. It's like she's responsible, except she's not responsible. The one thing she's responsible for is like pushing him to be engaged in his kids' lives.
Yeah. But other than that, it does depict their marriage as quite healthy. I think they refer to each other very lovingly. They listen to one another. They don't invalidate each other's feelings. There's kind of this subtle B plot of here's how a family should look. Charles Dickens, his wife, and his 3 children, but really the one child.
Except Mrs. Dickens wears the pants in the family.
Well, okay. All right.
Kind of.
I don't know that you can really say that, but she runs her household. That's for certain.
Yeah.
And I thought it's an interesting little side plot. It really seems to be they have this side plot purely to keep the kids entertained. Because if you're just doing an hour and a half of here's the life of Jesus without any humor interjected, then the
for
kids
a child
might get bored.
It can be hard to keep the attention of a child for something like that.
Yeah. Walter, that's the name of the son, Walter. I kept forgetting his name.
And there was 2 older children, a boy and a girl, I believe.
I'm guessing they're Gestas Gestas is one of the thief. I don't know that they're listed on here.
Yeah, they might not be. They're not really they're not integral to the story.
No, they're not. They basically sleep through the entire thing.
Yeah, that's right. They do.
Yeah. But it goes through Jesus' whole life from incarnation to resurrection. Very little time is spent on the resurrection. It's mostly his ministry leading up to Passion Week, and then the resurrection's right there at the end.
That's the one thing that I felt like they rushed that at the end, and I felt like more, because I was expecting, based upon how much time they spent on some of the other elements of the story, there was a lot surrounding the resurrection of Christ. And it was, he's on his cross. He says, it is finished, and, dies. And then
they show the curtain ripping in the temple.
They show the curtain ripping in the temple and everything. I'm like, oh, okay. So, but they don't really deal with 3 days in the tomb or any of the time spent. All of a sudden, the stones rolled away, and he's like, the little kid sees basically the risen Jesus, and then Jesus kind of walks off into the sunset.
Well, but I think maybe my favorite artistic part of the movie comes right there at the end too, though. So Jesus is at the tomb. I'm not sure if he walks out of it or
no, he's not. They just sold the
and the little boy Walter is looking at Jesus in the eyes, and there's a scene where suddenly you see all the miracles the movie's depicted before: the healing of the blind, casting out of the demons, the Jesus rescuing Peter from the water after he falls in because he doubts. All these different miracles, and suddenly you see them all through the eyes of Walter, but also through the eyes of the camera. So it's a first-person point of view for all these miracles. And I thought that was done quite well. And then the kind of key moment is you see that Walter in the place of Peter drifting into the water and drowning, presumably.
Right.
And then Jesus reaches down and pulls him out.
And then doesn't it move to him like he's like praying at that point, folded hands, and I think it's trying to depict his believing in Jesus.
It definitely is trying to depict that. I can't remember if it cuts to him praying or not, but the implication, because the end of the movie, then after that you cut back to not modern day, but Charles Dickens's day.
Yeah.
And
1840s.
Walter runs and wakes up his brother and sister and starts retelling the story, super excited. And the part we've left out, because it's really not relevant to the story, is that Walter's been obsessed with King Arthur this whole time. And suddenly he doesn't care about King Arthur anymore. And he cares about the King of Kings, who is Jesus.
That's why he gives his brother the sword.
Yes. Yeah. That's just little
side note of the attention keeping part of the story.
Right. Yeah.
For the children.
Yeah. Okay. But so that's kind of, we've talked about the actual structure of this movie. How's it doing, guys? Is it?
I mean, the box office it's showing pretty healthy.
19 million, I think, over the weekend.
Yeah, that's domestic. I guess it hasn't released internationally.
How many theaters?
From what I've seen, 3,200 theaters, which is a wide release.
That is a wide release.
But a super wide release would be like 4,500.
Okay.
So this, for someone that's not Disney or Pixar or DreamWorks, making an animated movie and releasing at not the biggest number of theaters you could, 20 million in a single weekend is quite healthy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's exciting. That means they'll probably be able to make more movies like this.
And I think it's great that it's star-studded cast.
Oh, yeah.
You may not know that going in unless you just recognize the voices, but I was really impressed with the people behind the characters. We can list some of those names.
So Kenneth Branagh, who you may remember as the blonde, smiley professor in Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, voices Charles Dickens. Uma Thurman, who's famous for all sorts of stuff, but like Kill Bill movies. She plays Charles's wife, Catherine. Mark Hamill, who's Luke Skywalker, plays King Herod. And the other one I'll mention is Pierce Brosnan, James Bond, plays Pontius Pilate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, wow. I mean that's some big names for sure. Yeah. What was the budget for the film?
That's the thing we don't know. They haven't reported that because they get to report that as they want. Oh, the other name we have to mention is Oscar Isaac plays Jesus. And the interesting thing to me, if you don't know who Oscar Isaac is, he's Poe Dameron in the Star Wars sequel trilogy.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
He's also in Dune.
Yeah, he's Duke Leto in the first Dune movie.
Yeah.
But he actually got his start. Like his first big break was playing Joseph of Nazareth in the Nativity Story.
Okay. Yeah.
So now he's played father and son. I thought that was pretty cool. And he does a great job.
I don't know if you guys think this, but in some ways, this almost really signals a pretty decisive shift in the ecosystem of Hollywood and creating film, to have these really mainstream actors who you could easily imagine like being in woke films or saying woke things, literally voicing the gospel.
Yeah.
That's kind of a seismic shift.
No, I do. I agree. It also it gives a lot of more validity, you could say, culturally speaking, to Angel Studios, that you get this star-studded lineup of actors.
Because up until this point, they've had actors like Neil McDonough, who you recognize, but you probably don't know the name, and other, Christian actors. And this is Jim Caviezel and others that you recognize, but again, you probably don't know their names. Yeah. But then these are names you know. These are A-list stars in Hollywood.
Yeah. And I don't know that it's an animated versus live action, if that would have made any difference. I assume they're not paid as much or the budget isn't as high for actors when it comes to just voice acting. But they did a great job. I just as far as the product goes, the look of the film, the sound of the film, it's as good as any Hollywood production you're going to see, in my opinion. I wasn't sitting there thinking that the animation was subpar or, the voice acting was subpar or anything.
I'd say the voice acting is absolutely its strongest feature.
Yeah.
I would say that the animation is certainly not subpar, but like there's some very high highs in animation. This doesn't quite get there, but it's quite good. No,
I think the medium of animation has developed to such a degree that this fits right in with it.
Yeah.
This is not going to be something you're going to look at and feel like, oh, that was done on the cheap.
No, it's not like that at all.
So, and it has a unique animation look to it.
Yeah.
It doesn't look like Pixar anime,
right,
or Disney's anime. Animation, not anime animation. It's just for the technical people like me and Sterling.
Yeah,
it's just it. So on that point, I think Angel Studios is showing that it is stepping up closer to that bar or that standard that we expect from Hollywood movies.
Yeah. And that's something we've talked about on this podcast before, that we hoped they're getting there. It seems like they're on the right track. And this is, I think, their first entry where it's like, this is a peer of most big budget animated movies that I've seen in theaters.
Yeah. Yeah. It'll be interesting to see ongoing. I do think this next weekend, because like you said, we're looking at Easter weekend.
Yeah.
If it does even better.
That would be incredible. Movies almost never do better on the second weekend. It has happened, but it could very well, because this is the story of Easter, basically.
Potentially time for it. You got a lot of people have Friday off for Good Friday.
Yeah, that's true.
So there might be, even more opportunity to go see the film then.
Yeah. So that's we've covered the movie. We can get to our rating in a minute, but just let's dig in on, just since I did scan through this actual book written by Charles Dickens. Let's talk about that for a second.
The source material.
The source material. Well, one of the source materials.
Yeah. Of Dickens.
Yes. Yeah. So this book was written for Dickens's own children, and it wasn't published for like 70 or 90 years after that, because he didn't want it to be published. It was for his kids.
So after he died, it was published?
After he died, I think after all his kids died, it was published by his grandkids.
Okay.
The story he tells is quite similar. It's kind of a condensed version of Jesus's life, but he includes more details. He includes various other miracles. And then he actually, this is kind of the main point that I thought was interesting. He does, in his story, do a lot more about the resurrection.
Okay.
And he even gets to Paul's Damascus experience where he meets Jesus.
Yeah.
And then that's where he stops, which is interesting.
Yeah.
The other aspect of the Dickens tale is that I was looking for this and I couldn't find any place where Dickens acknowledges that Jesus is God.
Okay.
He talks about Jesus as someone who comes to earth and has so much faith and lives so good that God kind of adopts him as a son, is kind of the way Dickens presents it.
Okay.
So I think the movie improves on Dickens's version in that, because Dickens is wrong to present it that way, I would say.
Yeah. Agreed.
Yeah. So that's just a little bit of flavor about the book behind the movie. And then we could dig into the four Gospels, but there's a lot to dig into.
Yeah.
So
we'll
let you go read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John yourself, and you absolutely should.
Yeah, go do that right now after the show.
Yes, yeah. All right, so y'all want to just do our ratings?
Let's go for it.
Yeah.
All right. So Thomas and I had a minute to write down our scores, but we'll just go through them one by one. So my woke free meter, that's our first metric, I gave this a 10. Y'all pointed out some reasons maybe to lower it a little bit. I'm not going to change my score. I gave it a 10 based on what I remembered. I'm going to stick with that. I think if you're worried about woke stuff, you do not have to worry about this movie. That's what I think. Thomas?
I gave it a 9. Kind of the point I was making. I felt there was a little bit, the relationship with Charles and his wife was a little bit uncomfortable, is the way I would put it.
I think that's fair.
Yeah.
I think I'd go with a 9 as well for the same reason.
Okay. All right. IQ or well written, I gave it an 8. I thought it's quite well written. The modern day parts are where you lose some points. It's not as good. Of course, the parts set 2,000 years ago are almost lifted word for word out of the Bible, or the phrasing may be rearranged, but it's lifted out of the greatest literary work of all time. So it's going to be well written.
Yeah.
So I gave it 8 points for that one.
Yeah, I gave it 7. I thought there was a few places where, it's a kid's movie, part of it. It wasn't bad by any means. 7's good. It's not, mind-boggling.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'd give it a 7 too, mainly because I was really frustrated with the introduction. And I think it could have laid the stage better. I think that it was already expressed all this. I was really annoyed with the children's behavior backstage. That whole intro sequence, I would have done it totally different. Yeah. That's really the only part of it I would have done differently.
Yeah. I would say just make it a little bit less hectic, honestly. That's all I would really do, is there's just too much too fast.
I wonder, too, in that point, the whole point of the gospel is that we're sinners needing salvation from our sin that has condemned us. You could have played that into that in that beginning scene a little bit more of I felt like he wasn't really being corrected for misbehavior.
Yeah.
And so part of it would have been, look, this was misbehaving. This was wrong. You need to know that this is wrong. And yet your wrongs can be righted with Christ.
That would have been a great opportunity for that.
It would have been, I agree, that's a miss. That's for sure a miss. So that was well written. So, and you gave your score of 7, right?
I did, yes.
Yeah. So artistic value, for me, I'm looking at, how is this animation style? What's the music like? What voice acting plays into this, but that's, I guess, slightly separate for me. The voice acting is stellar, absolute top notch. I don't have any complaints about the voice acting. I think the art wasn't exactly my favorite. It's not bad or anything. So I gave it a 7 out of 10.
I think this was an 8. I thought it was good. It was unique enough that it doesn't look like all others.
Yeah.
They definitely had a style, and they stuck with that style, and I think it worked. Yeah, I'm trying to picture myself as a child looking at this, because I remember as a child I gravitated to cartoons or anything like that more than live action. Would this have grabbed my attention? Yeah, I think it would.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's true.
Yeah, I think I give it a 7 strictly for personal aesthetic reasons.
Yeah.
It isn't really an indictment against it, but it's really not my favorite style.
Yeah.
But again, it's not for me.
Right.
It's for kids.
Yeah.
So that's fine.
But I think it was a good critique someone made earlier that a good kids movie should be enjoyed by adults.
That's
as well.
true. I did say that, actually.
Well, I think I'll let you have your cake both ways.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. So that was a 7.
Yes.
Okay. So entertainment value for me, an adult, and all of the parts all the points I'm knocking off here are about the Charles Dickens part. The Jesus parts I thought were done really well. I was very engaged. I shed a couple tears, because I do believe this story is true. I do believe this is literally the story of the Son of God coming and saving me personally for my sins. Mm-hmm. So it was very powerful. But I gave it a 6 because the kid stuff and the bit with the cat, there's a running theme with Charles Dickens not liking his son's cat the whole time. I just didn't really like it. But I think kids probably like it more than I do. I gave it a 6 for me and probably an 8 for kids.
That's fair.
Yeah, I gave it a 7. It's hard when you're judging a story that you know so well, besides the Charles Dickens element. That was kind of the new stuff. Everything else is more you're monitoring, at least I was, what are they going to put in regarding the life of Jesus and how true to the biblical record are they going to be with it?
Yeah.
And that's but that's not necessarily entertainment. So it wasn't not entertaining, but it wasn't, I don't know, 7 is what I'm going to sit with. I think I think people would enjoy it. But
Yeah, I think I give it a 6. I wasn't particularly entertained. I think there are some areas where it could have been a little bit more entertaining. I'm with you, Sterling. Mm-hmm. The parts about Jesus' life were great. They were wonderful. So again, I think I'm also mainly talking about the side stories here. And I've already mentioned the squabbles I have with particularly the intro. I think that's part of the entertainment value.
Yeah.
And that's really where I'm sourcing a lot of this.
Yeah. So, all right. So I added up all our averages. Andrew, I think yours averages out to exactly 7.
We didn't do the legacy.
Oh, we didn't do legacy. You're right. Why did I write down something twice then?
I don't know.
Okay. I got confused. Hang on. Legacy score. So will we be talking about this movie in 10 years? I think if you want a movie to show your, 6 to 8-year-old, 6 to 10-year-old, that is kind of the first step in who is Jesus, you might reach for this movie to show it to them. In terms of will adults be talking about this movie in 10 years outside of showing it to their kids? I don't think so. So I gave it a 5 for that because I think it has value for teaching kids going forward, but I think for adults, it's not going to have a lasting impact.
Yeah. I mean, when I think of a legacy, I'm trying to compare this movie with something that would be of a similar vein, like Prince of Egypt might be an example of a legacy movie, and you're comparing it to that one.
Yeah. Good example.
Yeah.
I give it a 6. It's well done. Mm-hmm. There's, it's the story of Jesus that's never going to change. Yeah. This one is hard because I think part of it too is some of that legacy factor comes to play in how old you were when you experienced a movie, and the nostalgia factor that's going to be a part of that. So for some people, especially young people that are 5 and 6 that may see this might go down in their annal of their own life. Man, that was a major impact movie. And so for them, it is a legacy film. But from where I'm sitting right now, it seems like middle of the road kind of.
Okay.
Yeah. And sometimes it's hard to tell when, a studio like Angel Studios, they seem like they're probably going to continue to be more prominent.
Oh, yeah.
But almost certainly. But I would still almost call them an upstart in some way.
Oh, yeah, they definitely are.
Definitely.
So it's hard to tell with that, how long is an upstart going to last? So I think I would give it a 5. I think those are some really good points, Thomas, especially from the perspective of who it's meant for, children, and how are they going to be impacted by this, probably a lot more significantly than an adult might.
Yeah. It will be interesting if Angel Studios continues and becomes a major studio, let's say in the future, in 20 years, if it's comparable to 21st Century Fox or something. Mm-hmm. If it's something like that in our minds, and then you hear, Angel Studio did this back then, it's our thought process about it are going to be different based upon that.
That's
too.
True. Yeah. So a lot depends on how they do in the future. And so far, I would say they are getting incrementally better.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So the averages, so that's actually all 5 this time, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm not going crazy this time. Yep. I don't know what happened earlier. So Andrew, I averaged yours for you. You gave it a 6.8 total.
Okay.
I gave it a 7.2, and if I'm doing the entertainment value for kids, I gave it a 7.6, but I'll stick to 7.2. Thomas, what did you give it?
7.4.
Okay. So that averages out to a 7.13 repeating. We'll just call it a 7.1.
Yeah. That's a pretty good score.
That's a pretty good score. I think it's our second highest, probably.
Yeah.
And I think it's deserved.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely good. Definitely for the Christian watching this, on Palm Sunday weekend, like we were, I think it's pretty powerful because it's dealing with Passion Week and what you're about to be remembering as you do your devotions and go to church. Mm-hmm. And I do think it's great for kids. The kids in my theater seem to enjoy it. They seem to be entertained. So recommended. Go see this movie. Yeah. All right. That's all of it, right, guys? We don't have any other niggling points we forgot to mention?
I don't believe so.
I don't think so. I hope that everyone has a blessed and happy Easter.
Yes.
Remember Jesus on Good Friday.
He is risen.
He is risen indeed. All right. Well, we will see you next week after Easter. Yeah, we'll be in here on Easter Monday. That's all we've got for you. We're brought to you by the Patriot Post, which is the oldest conservative news digest on the web. It's right and it's free. Be sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye.
See you guys.